My first experience with death that I remember was my great uncle Mike. I think I was about 5 years old. Conversations were calm and composed around me. I didn't participate in any viewings. I remember my family going to the funeral and my younger sister and I staying at my grandparents' house with a babysitter. My perception was that death is sterile, under control, and structured. Those of us who've experienced loss later in life than a kindergartner know that is often not how loss and grief introduce themselves into our lives. Loss, death, grief are not sterile, controlled, or structured. They shatter our lives like a rock thrown through a picture window. Suddenly, the elements we have so carefully kept outside are moving freely in our living space. And in the middle of our front room lies the perpetrator with shards of glass surrounding it, creating a scenario that demands that we stop our day-to-day routines and tend to the new messiness. When you have work, family, a home to maintain, and a pandemic to navigate, the loud and disorienting entrance of loss, death, and grief can leave even the strongest person tired, weary, struggling, and carrying an unusually heavy load. The prophet Isaiah wrote this to the Hebrew people about when weariness settles upon you. Comfort, comfort my people, says your God. So to whom will you compare me? And who is my equal, says the Holy One. Power for the weary. Look up to the sky and consider who created these. The one who brings out their attendants one by one, summoning each of them by name. Because of God's great strength and mighty power, not one is missing. Why do you say, Jacob, and declare, Israel, my way is hidden from the Lord? My God ignores my predicament. Don't you know? Haven't you heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. God doesn't grow tired or weary. God's understanding is beyond human reach, giving power to the tired and reviving the exhausted. Youths will become tired and weary. Young men will certainly stumble. But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will fly upon the wings like eagles. They will run and not be tired. They will walk and not be weary. Grief and loss often arrive alongside death, and yet many of us know they are also the traveling companions of unemployment, severed relationships, and even the embedded ideologies, lessons, and beliefs of our younger selves. 2020 has taught my family and I that grief and loss can come with the end of year rituals for school being shared over a laptop and the internet instead of the loud expanse of a school gymnasium. The exhaustion and weariness of grief can come with canceled travel plans, missing extended family members, and social distancing that keeps us in our backyard instead of at swimming pools, public libraries, church sanctuaries, and concert halls. And in the midst of it all, grief, loss, tiredness, and weariness remain committed consorts to the departure of our loved ones, family, friends, neighbors, coworkers, and even those whom you may grieve that you've never met. Our communities, near and far, large and small, have experienced unprecedented losses over the past year. And even though it may be uncomfortable, I invite you to pause for a moment. Take a deep breath, maybe close your eyes, and reflect back on one or two of the times grief has aggressively entered your life through that proverbial picture window over the past year. Please pause and remember the ways that grief has felt, the ways that grief has interrupted your plans, the ways that you feel as though you're a different person on this side of the grief compared to a year ago. Pause and remember. I share the words of Isaiah because as Christian believers, Isaiah's words speak to the truth of humanity and to the truth of God. What draws us down and feels burdensome is light upon the shoulders of God. What feels isolating and lonely binds us not only to each other, but to a God who seeks to be the comfort wrapping around us. 2020 has introduced a variety of experiences of grief for all of us. And while Isaiah's words speak of a God whose resolve is to hold us tight, I often look to Jesus to understand what that looks like and how I can live into God's commitment to me. Isaiah's words and our talk of grief remind me of a lesson from Jesus found in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 11, verses 28 through 30. Come to me, all of you who are struggling hard and carrying heavy loads, and I will give you rest. Put on my yoke and learn from me. I am gentle and humble, and you will find rest for yourselves. The balm for grief, the sense of exhaustion and weariness, is the yoke of love. Christ called to let yourself fall in love with your school or your job. Christ calls us to fall in love with our neighbors and our community members. Christ calls us to let ourselves fall in love with how we celebrate with our family, holidays, and seasons. The call to love, the yoke to pick up and wear is caring about the other, seeking relationship, immersing yourself in your community, and the interconnectedness is the balm that soothes the grief. Love is the balm that Jesus tells us is gentle and humble. Now, this is what I think of when I hear this scripture. The scholars, though, who write commentaries about this scripture will tell you that this segment, this pericope, is about discipleship. They talk about how the yoke is about service and that Jesus' invitation isn't about an ease of life, but deliverance from the burdens that come from a life lived outside in alignment with Jesus. Perhaps I'm splitting hairs, for I believe they're one and the same. To care for my wounded heart and the loss and weariness I carry, I find that leaning into the teachings of Jesus and pushing myself to expand my heart and find love for others offers the care and attention my heart needs. And we should be honest with ourselves, for the gift of grief is a realization that it hurts so bad because we have loved and have been loved. The yoke of Jesus, which is simple but not easy, is to open ourselves to the very act that so often precedes grief. When we enter into relationship with Jesus by letting ourselves fall in love with creation, with our communities, with our neighbors, and the stranger and the widow and the orphan, with hope to nurture and care for our wounded hearts laden with grief, we enter into the cycle of interconnectedness with each other, with God, and that cyclical relationship of love and grief and love and grief. As you pray and meditate on the grief you carry this day, may you feel God's comfort and hear Jesus' invitation to love again. Love broadly, love deeply, and know that you too are loved. Put your hands together.